Following Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, an event that essentially pulled America into World War II, the US government approved the creation of Japanese internment camps to house Japanese Americans until the end of the war. One such person was Tola Okazaki, who was born on September 21, 1922 in Los Angeles, California, to Frank Okazaki, a grocery store owner, and Som Okazaki, both of whom were born in Japan. His family also included two older and one younger sister. Soon after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor at the end of 1941, he was relocated to a Japanese internment camp, Heart Mountain Relocation Center, near Cody, Wyoming. And in 1943, he was registered for service in the U.S. Army Field Artillery Branch, holding the rank of first-class private. He was sent to the European Theater of Operations in May of 1944 and returned to the U.S. in January of 1946. On January 14, 1946, he was officially discharged from the U.S. military. 4 years after the end of the war, in November 1949, at the age of 27, he married Rosie Okazaki, who worked as a sewing machine operator. He died of old age in Marina del Rey on November 14, 1996, at the age of 74. He was cremated and buried at the LANC that same year. His wife, however, went on to live for another 15 years and passed away recently in 2011 and was buried with her husband at that same cemetery.
While Chinese Americans were not directly affected by the Japanese internment camps, because of fear-mongering and racist ideologies that claim all Asian people look the same, during this period in history, all Asian Americans began being treated even more poorly by society. In response, Chinese Americans in particular fought very hard to differentiate themselves from their Japanese counterparts, even going as far as wearing pins that stated, "We hate them too," to demonstrate they were also against the enemy. While civilians discriminated against Chinese Americans, the government wanted to improve the community's perception of them because they were worried about losing China as an ally. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which severely limited Chinese immigration to the United States and prevented them from serving in the military, was repealed.
World War II Chinese American veteran Sergeant Kwok Bon Wong did not start as an American citizen. Wong was born on September 9, 1920, in Canton, China, at a time when the country was in war. Fearing for his safety, he decided that he would leave China and seek new opportunities out overseas and into the United States in hopes of making a livelihood. When stepping foot in the US, however, he faced immediate discrimination from the Chinese Exclusion Act. He and many Chinese immigrants on Angel Island were forced to wait for days to be processed, and some were denied or detained on the island. Due to the heavy stereotypes that stigmatized Chinese people as being labeled dirty and unclean, Wong and other immigrants were forced to strip naked during the medical examinations to ensure the immigration officers that they are not carrying disease. Despite the barriers from entering the country, Wong was able to be processed and entered the United States. Though he lived in the country for a few years, Wong decided that residing in the US was not enough. On September 16, 1942, he was admitted to the army to fight for the country in World War II. In September 1944, he was discharged from the military due to cellulitis, a disease he contracted from his foot during his service that severely weakened his immune system. And on March 10, 1948, Kwok Bon Wong passed away at age 28 in Los Angeles. He was then buried in Los Angeles National Cemetery.
Another Chinese veteran who served in World War II was Som Kwok Wong, born on June 20, 1889 in Deadwood, South Dakota, to his dad, Philly Wong, and his mom, Halshek Wong. He was a first-generation immigrant whose parents were from the Shun district of China. His father worked as both a merchant who dealt luxury items from China and a doctor. Som had 2 brothers and 4 sisters. Som Kwong's whole family did their best to fight against the effects of Asian discrimination. His father was a wealthy veteran and a recognized leader of his race in the Society of the Black Hill Pioneers, devoting much of his wealth to the development of the mining industry. Som Kwong's oldest brother, Hong Kwong, continued to build his family's reputation by becoming the first Chinese man who was allowed to vote in the municipal election in the history of Deadwood. He graduated from his local public high school in South Dakota and attended the University of Illinois for college. On September 4, 1918, he married Hyetao Wong in New York. He was then employed to do architectural and engineering work and moved to China. He He got further education in architecture and engineering at Michigan College and had 3 sons. As soon as Song Kwong was allowed to serve, he decided to enlist. He joined the military on December 14, 1944, to prove that he was a true American and make his mark on the world just like his brother and veteran father. He enlisted in the Marine Corps, 1st Marine Division, 3rd Amphibious Corps, as an intelligence officer, specifically a Chinese interpreter. Over time, he became a captain and aide to Colonel Charles C. Brown and ended up being considered the highest-ranking Chinese officer in America during World War II. His unit participated in ground combat and conducted amphibious assaults. He was involved in several major battles against the Japanese Empire in the Pacific Theater, including the Battle of Guadalcanal, the Battle of Peleliu, and the Battle of Okinawa. In September 1945, Song Kwong traveled by air on a hazardous course from Shanghai, China to Tianjin, China, through territory occupied by the enemy, where his unit's primary mission was preventing the People's Liberation Army from accepting Japanese soldiers' surrender. Song Kwong Wong became part of the first group of Marines to land in Japanese-occupied China, which led to the successful landing and seizure of the Tianjin area. As a result of his major contribution to the war, he ended up receiving the American and Asia Pacific Campaigns Medal for Good Conduct and Victory, as well as a Bronze Star Commendation. The 1st Marine Division as a whole was demobilized in 1946, and thus on June 28th, Song Kwong was discharged from the military. His wife lived in China during the service, which may have been difficult, but even though they stayed married, Song Kwong never ended up reconnecting with her after he left. After his service, he moved to Los Angeles and she stayed in Hong Kong, where she eventually passed away on May 23, 1958. Song Kwong died 6 months after her on December 7th from cancer of the throat and ended up being buried in the Los Angeles National Cemetery. After his death, her remains ended up getting shipped back to the Los Angeles National Cemetery, and they ended up getting buried together.